A university's freedom must be the freedom of its members, faculty and students, to think and speak for themselves. A university must not have dominant ways of thinking.
What was most important to me was I had strong views about what a good university should be like. I think one aspect, at least as far as I experienced it, of leadership was that I had these views, I stuck to them. I was, in the sociological jargon of the 60s, I was inner directed. And I do think any leader who wants to be successful cannot possibly be other directed. That I know for sure. But has to find a subtle balance between the demands of the outside and his or her own values.
Stanford brings in its first outsider, Gerhard Casper, who is a humanist of a European tradition, very much of a museum goer, smart man, articulate man. Invited himself to the museum to have me walk him around and show him what we were doing. But he became a very important supporter of the rebuild of the museum.
Gerhard Casper was an incredibly different kind of guy, and it was very clear his heart was in academic affairs. And he very quickly on appointed a commission on undergraduate education, which was to sort of set the tone, a new tone, for Stanford.
This was an idea of Gerhard Casper, and it was his desire to make that one of his major university projects. The commission was an effort to look at the curriculum or the academic experience of students in a quite broad way. It was more than just the curriculum. It was a big group. It was a diverse group.
The campaign for undergraduate education had two phases. The first phase in my last year, where we quietly raised the initial money we needed. We raised $300 million as a starter, and then of course the campaign overall had raised, I think in the end, $1.1 billion, the largest amount ever raised by an American university just for undergraduate education. And much of it went to financial aid, but also to other purposes.
Really, that is the legacy of Gerhard Casper, was changing that attitude and turning us into an institution that really embraces the undergraduate education mission.
I probably walked down to Gerhard's office 5-6 times a day, in addition to the formal meetings that we'd set up, just to bounce things off of him and to tell him where I was going. But he really was willing to delegate to me the kind of day-to-day budget decisions. I liked making the trains run on time. I think it freed him to do some bigger things. He could think big about the physical campus. Gerhard Casper is really the father of a lot of the remaking of this campus, including the creation of an engineering lot.
I had two groups that to me were very, very important. One was what at Stanford was called the cabinet, and it was basically the deans plus higher ranking university officials. The other group I had, the provost and the vice presidents and a handful of others. I found these interactions with critical people who were willing to disagree, very important, willing to disagree with me, is something that is absolutely crucial for doing your job.
I think Gerhard came with his own view of how medicine and the university should be integrated, and also came with his own view about what was happening in medicine, particularly in academic medicine in research-intensive institutions across the country. He and Joe Martin, who was chancellor at UCSF, had the metaphoric walk in the woods and talked about what it would have looked like if Stanford and UCSF were to combine their clinical operations. And I think that was a pivotal point.
Gerhard was very enthusiastic about this merger because he thought that indeed it would help the hospital. But in those days, the hospital was losing large amounts of money, and the university had actually to fund the hospital operations.
We had built into the merger agreement consciously the right for either of us to call for an unwinding of the merger. So we unilaterally terminated the merger. I had a couple of friends who were very involved on the other side who were very unhappy with that. but who in later years came back and said, you made the right call.
Everything depends on building a team, having a group of people who trust, who to some extent share your values, and therefore it will be easier to implement it.
Stanford's first president, David Starr Jordan, chose Die Luft der Freiheit weht, the wind of freedom blows, as the informal motto. What a splendid choice Jordan and Stanford made when they invoked the winds of freedom as the short expression of principle to guide Stanford University.